we have this incredibly powerful engine online called Google, which allows you to ask, and ChatGPT, which allows you to ask any question under the sun and get thousands of potential right answers and responses. And so,
ChatGPT will actually cater its answers to your previous conversations as well. So you got to be careful about echo chamber.
For sure. Yeah, and I think it's probably been hundreds of years that this idea of peer-reviewed literature came out, which is the idea that we can actually legitimize documents based on just getting more humans to read and interpret and be rational about the way that they interpret certain information. And that's why peer-reviewed studies and documents are so important, because if a certain amount of people that read and review that are smart and specialized in whatever field that document is written in, say it's bad and wrong, then it doesn't get released.
Correct. Right? Yeah. I find it interesting, Elon on Twitter added the community comments, which I think is brilliant because it allows for dispute of an idea. And if the general consensus is that idea is flawed, then it makes a note and you're aware of it.
Yeah.
So I think that, it's cool that he did that.
Yeah.
All about free speech, right? He basically said, I love him in that interview when they asked him, like, if you lose sponsors and like all these different things for promoting, an idea that's contrary to what your advertisers want, what do you think about that? And I can't remember, he quoted some movie like about, costing him money or whatever. And he was like, I don't care about that. I'm for free speech.
Yeah. And
so if it costs me money, so be it. If that's the cost of freedom of speech, I'm okay to pay it.
Yeah.
Which I think is a great mindset. So that's Soviet Union, Mao in China. Mao rewrote history to emphasize his role as the savior of China, downplayed other figures in the Communist Party's rise during the Cultural Revolution. Mao's Red Guard destroyed historical artifacts, books, monuments that didn't align with his vision of communism. So, we saw some of this a year or two ago when we were tearing down historic statues because we wanted to paint maybe these historical figures with a lens that I don't think was fair. It wasn't nuanced. We were going back as bad actors and looking at them like we talked about Christopher Columbus or others in a light that painted them through a 21st century light that painted them as evil. But I don't think that was fair, and I think that it was designed to try and revise history in a way in which it painted the founding of the U.S. as a patriarchal tyranny and nothing more. Mm-hmm. The postmodernist idea of power struggle and that it was an oppressor and everybody that was not a straight white male was oppressed, which I think is a dangerous framework to operate from.
Yeah.
Cambodia, you got Pol Pot, one of the worst murderers of all time, but he went back and destroyed all the Buddhist traditions of Cambodia. So wiping religion from the state. I think we see that in today's society, right? Wanting to take In God We Trust off the dollar, not giving the Pledge of Allegiance. There have been sporting events where they haven't sung the national anthem now. So it's like all of these ideas of removing Western Judeo-Christian values from society, talking about amending the Constitution to remove God and the gift of inalienable rights. And it just seems crazy to me that they're wanting to do that. This all stemmed for me, this talking about this was the change of AD and BC or BC and AD to BCE and CE, which I think is, again, it's a bit of revisionist history. It's trying to whitewash our culture from its Judeo-Christian inception. And I think that that's dangerous because where do we go from there? If we remove the Judeo-Christian values and underpinnings to our society and we get rid of God, we become a what? Friedrich Nietzsche said we become a nihilistic society that was, really what the postmodernists are afraid of. Everything is a power struggle. And, that's really what happened in, Western Europe at that time. Nietzsche was pretty brilliant. I think he forecasted what was going to happen 100 years before it happened or 60 years before it happened by saying that the death of God would create a vacuum where it becomes just a power struggle. And without the moral framework and, all of those aspects, these men would be able to create revisionist history and just murder by the tens of millions. And that's what happened. I mean, all the aspects we're talking about here, and, Russia and Nazi Germany and Cambodia and North Korea and East Germany, and it just goes on and on and on and on. And so I think you just have to, I think if one will delve into that history, they'll realize that this is a dangerous game we're playing right now in the United States.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of people that believe that America's insulated from ever becoming so radical that we could actually, implode as a country. Do you believe that?
No, I think we're fairly close to that. I think that assassination attempts on an elected president would show that we have people that are so at odds right now in our country that they're willing to kill the opposition. I mean, that has never been how we functioned in America. We sparred with words. We didn't kill Americans.
Oh, what about JFK?
Yeah, well, I guess we'll find out if they release the documents. But it's like, yeah, I think that there are some aspects to America that are functioning in that way. But I think one of the main driving factors of that is social media. I think I was watching a Rogan podcast where the guy who was over making sure that the algorithm for Facebook was ethical got fired because he wrote a paper that stated that the algorithm was not functioning ethically. It was optimized for maximal engagement, and that was causing polarization and anger. Those were the two most engaging aspects for the algorithm, and that's what it was pushing.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know anybody who would look at society and say we haven't become more polarized. I think we live in the most polarized society we've ever had. And I think that's dangerous, because when we refuse to see the nuance of the argument and we don't find common ground when we're on opposite sides of an argument, I think what we start to do is dehumanize the other side. I mean, like, you've seen that in some of the language from conservatives to liberals and liberals back to conservatives, right? They just have all sorts of names. I mean, if you want to call Trump Hitler, I mean, come on. That is dehumanizing a person. That's refusing to see the nuance in the argument, Same thing with, I don't know what names people called Kamala, but, I think it's refusing to see the nuance in the argument. If you say, oh, she just slept her way to the top, which was a common argument, it's like, well, I don't think that's necessarily true. I think that, she's an intelligent individual. I mean, she is a lawyer. You have to pass the bar.
Yeah.
That's difficult to do. I know smart people who, took multiple times to pass the bar, but it's refusing to give grace and see nuance that I think causes that division.
Yeah. Yeah. We talk about pretty much everything in life is built like one brick at a time, precept upon precept, right? It's just one small thing at a time. But also, I believe that for the most part, things are torn down the same way, right?
Agreed.
So I think we often think like there's going to be some big radical event that's going to change everything. And you see it in humans who self-destruct. This typically does not happen overnight. This happens over long, sustained periods of time. And that's where I think we are at potentially as a country.
Yeah, I think you're right. Nobody leaves like a healthy mind frame and family and all those things and goes and becomes a cocaine addict tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's just not how it functions. It's by small and simple things that great things are brought to pass.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we got to be aware.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dangerous. All right. Well, that was a rant.
Speaking of North Korea.
Quite a side comment. Yeah. I figure we could probably just skip through the rest of those. I think we've given enough of revisionist history to kill that point, but we just want you to be aware. I just want you to be aware. I want to speak my piece against that and just, put it out there that revisionist history is a bad idea. And if we're not careful, we will become a country that's run by a dictator that has one side that dehumanizes the other to the point that they're willing to just murder them.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's healthy. I think we need to see each individual as endowed with rights from a creator. And those rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Bible. Okay, so that's what we're talking about today. Now, I facetiously said, fictional book, most reliable of all time. That doesn't leave a lot for nuance. But we're going to get into nuance. And I think that by the time we're done, you'll have one of those two conclusions as your understanding of the Bible, because I think it's almost irrefutable, the evidence that we're going to put forth today about the historical reliability of the Bible.
Yeah.
The Bible is a beast, the most beastly in all history. Yeah. And so it's pretty incredible. I'm excited to delve into it today.
Same.
It'll be a lot of fun to discuss. So where I figured we'd start is probably in the most irrefutable aspect of its validity, which is in archaeological corroboration. So, we talk a lot about empirical evidence. This is as empirical as it gets. So archaeological finds are empirical. They're hard finds in the ground that they've dug up, and you can look at it. You can see these in museums. Go touch them if you want. Probably not touch them, but you can look at them. And so I just wanted to go through. Archaeology has uncovered numerous discoveries that align with the Bible accounts, demonstrating its reliability as a historical document. Below are detailed examples with specific evidence and references. So the first, I figure we'll just start with a big bang, is the Dead Sea Scrolls. So if you're not familiar with how the Dead Sea Scrolls were uncovered, it's kind of an interesting story. In Qumran, outside of Israel by the Dead Sea, there was a shepherd who was herding goats, I believe is the story. And one of his goats had run off and gone into a cave. And instead of going into the cave, he was just going to throw some rocks into it to scare the goat out. And when he tossed the rocks in, what he heard was like the crashing of clay, the breaking of clay. And so decided to investigate further. And what they found were a bunch of clay jars. So 11 caves in Qumran that had just hundreds of manuscripts. And what they found was these manuscripts were an exact copy of the Bible text, and carbon dated. They were 1,000 years older than any textual evidence we had ever had for the Bible. So just an incredible archaeological find. They dated from 250 BC to AD 68. So you had stuff that was written before Christ and stuff that was written after Christ. But, some of the unique aspects of it was that, it was the oldest, so it predated any manuscript by 1,000 years. But they confirmed their remarkable accuracy and transmission of the biblical text over centuries, showing that modern versions closely align with ancient ones, 95% accurate. And any inaccuracy was typically going to be misspelling of names or locations, or maybe juxtaposition of words. So instead of saying like the Lord Christ, they said Christ the Lord. Right? So very simple differences in spelling or grammar that didn't really affect the meaning. So the biblical connection there is the scrolls validate the textual integrity of the Old Testament. They found the Isaiah scroll, Isaiah 53, a key messianic prophecy, is identical in the scrolls. 99.5% accuracy is the statistic that I read when I was looking at how accurate was the Isaiah scroll. So, you want to talk about phenomenal accuracy. And then what's so brilliant about that is we're going to cover a section later about fulfilled prophecies. Isaiah was one of the most prolific prophets of the Old Testament and has had some awesome prophecies fulfilled. But to understand that what he said and the contextual reliability and how accurate it had been translated is phenomenal. So I think it adds a lot of weight contextually to the validity of the Bible as an accurate historical document. Because, I think one of the main criticisms of the Bible is like it was just written as fiction, that these are not actual relative historical documents. But when you find corroborating sources in dispersed geographic locations by different sects, because I can't remember who the scrolls were kept and written by, but it was like a Jewish sect that had kept and written the scrolls. And so, it's just interesting to understand that this was not, it's a different sect of religion in a different geographical location at a different time that had exact identical text, to verify the validity of the Old Testament text.
What are the like if you go back, what the Jewish people who wrote these scrolls,
Yep.
what were they writing these scrolls based off of? Like, what sort of archaeology or findings did they have to transcribe these?
The Jews, I mean, it would have come from either eyewitness accounts or it would have come from oral tradition. So, those are the two main ones. Now you can go back and you can find like historical archaeological finds. Like we went through in our previous argument about world religions.
Yeah.
We looked at some of the ancient discoveries of religious sites that have been found. So you would have had that. But the Bible in and of itself, I mean, it gives its own genesis. Talks about Adam, the first man, and then it gives his genealogy, and then it talks about the recordings of his children, and then, the dispensations and prophets that followed after Moses and Abraham and all those people. And so they would have been basically going off of those ancient scripts, the stories that were told and the scripts that they had previously. And then, there are some archaeological sites that date back to those times, pre the Abrahamic religion, which we talked about.
Yeah.
Some people say that all this came out of the Abrahamic religion, but no, you can find commonality in those ancient religious traditions that tie to the writings of the Old Testament. So, talks about Isaiah, Psalms, Deuteronomy, which are foundational to both Jewish and Christian traditions. So the Jews, who operated on the law of Moses primarily, Deuteronomy is a lot of that, so like the Torah, the ancient books of the Old Testament for the Jews, all of that is what was kept here because this was a Jewish sect of people. So it was writings of the Essenes, I think is how you pronounce that, an ascetic Jewish sect, providing context for religious beliefs and practices during the Second Temple era.
Do you believe that you fast forward to today, right? We're talking about 2024 now. You've got hundreds, maybe thousands of versions of the Bible.
Yep.
So if you log in, like there's apps on your phone, you can go download a Bible app. And in that Bible app, you can choose from at least dozens, maybe hundreds of different versions of the Bible. Do you believe that this is dangerous, that there's so many different versions of the Bible? We're talking about accuracy from the Dead Sea Scrolls to the Bible. In your perspective, Luke, what is the source of truth when it comes to the correct version of the Bible?
I would say yes. I think from an English translation perspective, the King James Version of the Bible is the most accurate translation to English. And it was the earliest, it's the most vetted. I would say that the King James Version is probably the best version of the Bible.
Is there consensus around
that? I believe that there is. I believe that there is. In the research I did around the Bible, it talks about the King James Version being the most accurate translation to English.
Yeah.
So, because it was taken from the original texts, the Greek and the Latin, Hebrew, right? So, it's not a translation of a translation into English. Now you have like the modern translation of the King James Version, where you take out the Old English verbiage and you replace it with modern context. I even saw just a hilarious clip. I was up at a youth retreat where I played a clip for the youth of a pastor that had found the Gen Z Bible. And he read a clip from the Gen Z Bible, and it was just hilarious. The kids were just rioting because it was using words like, Sigma, and, it talked about Christ, and it said, he is him, like just all those funny taglines that kids use today.
Yeah.
But you definitely lose a lot of the spiritual context of scripture when you take it into something like a Gen Z translation. So yes, I believe that there is some danger there. Now, in talking about translation, we'll get into that. We're going to cover accuracy of the manuscript, translation into different languages, and all those aspects.
Yeah.
I believe that across different languages, it has been able to maintain its integrity tremendously. But I think translation multiple times into the same language for different subsets of the culture is dangerous.
Yeah. Well said.
Good question. The next archaeological discovery, it's called the Tel Dan Stele, found in 1993-94 at Tel Dan in northern Israel. This 9th century BC basalt stone inscription contains the phrase, the house of David, providing the earliest extra-biblical reference to King David. So this confirms the existence of King David and his dynasty, previously doubted by some scholars who considered him a mythological figure. So, David is pretty prolific in scripture. And so some people, had theorized that maybe he was mythological in nature and had been written as more allegorical to try and show, different aspects of the religion at the time. But then to be able to find archaeological evidence that referred to the house of David, the Davidic dynasty, aligning with like 2 Samuel, where God promises David's line will endure, I think is just, vindication for those that follow the Bible. Anachronisms, which is where you find missteps in ancient text according to modern understanding, where they would have said, oh, we don't have any archaeological substance for David. He's a mythological figure. But then those anachronisms sort themselves out over time as we find evidence, in our religion in general. The Book of Mormon was known for having a lot of anachronisms, talking about steel and concrete and horses and all these different things. What's amazing to me is I think there were maybe 200 or 250 anachronisms that were initial criticisms of the book.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're down to like 35 now. So of the original 250, 170 of them or more have been resolved over time as, science and archaeology and those things come to light. So I think you got to be careful about making snap judgments based on current research. That's another thing I find difficult about a non-theistic framework is that science is designed to just disprove itself. And I don't feel like you can have any level of consistency in that belief system. I think it becomes so difficult to find reliability there. The third one here, Pool of Bethesda. So excavations in the late 19th and 20th centuries uncovered the Pool of Bethesda in Jerusalem, described in John 5:2 as having 5 porticos. So this too was thought to be fantasy. Critics doubted the pool's existence until the site matched the description in the Gospel of John, confirming its historicity. So located in Jerusalem near the Sheep Gate, it was where Jesus healed a paralyzed man, showcasing the gospel's geographical accuracy. So not only does this one tie into the biblical text, but also to the validity of Jesus.
Yeah.
Right, which is kind of cool. So it ties both of them together is why I picked that one. The Pilate Stone, this was unearthed in 1961. Caesarea Maritima, this limestone block bears the inscription naming Pontius Pilate. So there had never been anything found about Pontius Pilate because he wasn't like a real well-known prefect at that time. He was over Judea, which was kind of out in the middle of nowhere. But, he's pivotal in the story of convicting Jesus to the crucifixion when he washes his hands and, lets the convicted felon go and then decides to crucify Jesus, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
But the stone that they found basically named Pontius Pilate the Roman prefect of Judea. And so they realized that he was a historical figure of Judea, which just ties into the Bible, Matthew 27, Mark 15, where it confirms Pilate's historical role as governor during the time of Jesus, supporting the New Testament account of the crucifixion. So the historical existence of Pilate, central figure in Jesus' trial, which I think is awesome. Again, testament of the Bible, testament of Jesus. Those two are pretty interconnected. It's tough to find contextual proof for the Bible that doesn't also validate Jesus as a central figure in it,
yep.
Which is so interesting to me. Next is Hezekiah's tunnel and the Siloam inscription. So this one doesn't verify Jesus, but it does verify some text about the Assyrian siege of King Hezekiah's city at the time. So it talks about in 2 Kings 20:20 and 2 Chronicles 32:30 about digging a tunnel for water and other things to be able to move in and out of the city when they were being sieged by Assyria. And they found within the tunnel the Siloam inscription, which described its construction and some of the materials inside of it. So it matched perfectly with the biblical context. So it was super interesting. Not only did they find the tunnel, they found an inscription about what the tunnel was about, which is awesome. It was stolen. I believe the inscription was stolen by thieves and then had to be recovered, and it was kind of damaged, but they were trying to steal it and sell it for money. So it confirms the biblical account of King Hezekiah's preparations to protect Jerusalem, including rerouting water to the city. The historical accuracy of the description in the book of Kings and Chronicles. I got reference points for all these too. One of the things we've talked about that we haven't done previously is maybe posting these arguments on a page. So if people want to go in and read the full argument as well as the sites or the references that we cite, that they can. So we could do that. Next one, Mesha stele, the Moabite stone. This was found in 1868, Jordan. This stele was inscribed by King Mesha of Moab in the 9th century BC. It describes Moab's rebellion against Israel, provides a Moabite perspective of the events of 2 Kings, corroborating the conflict between Moab and Israel. So it mentions the house of Omri, verifying the existence of the Israelite dynasty, and also ties together with 2 Kings, showing the Moabite, just going back and forth between Israel and the Moabites. The Cyrus cylinder, discovered in 1879 in Babylon. This clay cylinder describes King Cyrus of Persia policy of allowing exiled people to return to their homelands. So that you'd think, like, what does that have to do with the Bible? This ancient king's policy of allowing captured people to return to their homelands. But then you look at Ezra 1:1-4, where Cyrus decrees that the Jewish people may return to Jerusalem to rebuild their temple. And it's like, wow, yeah, that's an amazing archaeological evidence for the historicity and accuracy of the Bible. To be able to pull, an ancient king's, to find his whole policy regarding allowing exiled people or people exiled to return to their homelands, and then being able to corroborate that to a single verse in the Bible is pretty brilliant, I think, So it supports the historical accuracy of the Babylonian exile. And those are the ones that I chose. I think that, there's actually quite a few more. I probably could have pulled 20. I only went through 7 there. But I think that, these archaeological discoveries demonstrate that the Bible reflects real historical events, places, and people. They counter claims of myth or fabrication and provide tangible evidence of the Bible's reliability as a historical document. I don't know how you refute that. For those that say the Bible is some crazy made up text, because they want to cherry pick certain verses out of it, or they want to use factual evidence or revisionist history or whatever it is to try and discredit it. I don't know how you discredit these, dispersed archaeological findings that tie to all sorts of different aspects of the accuracy and validity of the Bible.
Yeah, let alone just like go to Jerusalem one time.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. Do you think that there's, I think the latest discovery that you talked about was the Tel Dan Stele, which is 94, 95, which is not that long ago. Do you believe that there's probably a high probability that there's lots more archaeological evidence yet to be found that would be, not just for the Bible, but just in general, right?
For sure. I don't doubt that we will continue.
I wonder what percentage we've actually explored.
In the U.S., it's minute. This is one of the criticisms of the Book of Mormon when talking about horses and other things. We've now discovered that there were early forms of those that have been discovered in different parts of South America and other places. But you're making an argument that something is invalid. We have, I believe, archaeologically discovered less than 1% of the United States. So it's really tough for me when anybody draws some type of absolute conclusion about the validity of something because we haven't discovered it archaeologically. when we've discovered 1% of what could be discovered archaeologically. It's like, yeah, that sounds like a really bad position to take, you know? So I don't know, but people do take crazy positions like that. You know, I think that as we continue to do archaeology, we'll find a lot more. Are you fact checking my archaeological?
Yeah, I was curious to see if there was any. Again, like the danger of this is I'm just quickly searching on Google.
Well, we've already been claimed to be Google scientists, so.
Yeah, it says that prehistory includes over 99% of human past from the past. So I think it's in alignment. Some of these say we haven't discovered even 10%.
Yeah, and there's actually been a lot more archaeological research in more ancient places. America, you know, fairly new, but what we're finding is like, you know, you've seen some of the LiDAR studies that show these massive cities that we never even knew existed that have been buried underneath of jungle for a couple hundred years.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, there are places that we can't even go to archaeologically discover because they're so overgrown. You know, it just doesn't make sense to try and get in there and do those types of things. I have no doubt that we will continue to find archaeological discoveries that corroborate the Bible's text.
Yeah. Is there any marine discoveries that we've made around
underwater
the Bible? Yeah. I
didn't actually look into that. So I'm nothing off the top of my mind I can think of, you know. Some of the Graham Hancock stuff about Atlantis or some of those other things, I mean, is interesting to me. They have found like large obelisk structures and other things underwater, I know. Yeah. So there are definitely ancient cities that have been submerged at time. You know, some people say that's because of like the pulse water melts or global warming in the past, coming out of the ice age, you know, some of those different things.
Yeah.
I find some of those arguments about Earth having been around multiple times, like civilizations rising and falling based on the flood myths that permeate all of religious culture. We kind of talked about in the last argument. Yeah. I found some of that fascinating, but I don't know about, you know, findings underwater for biblical evidence. Next section, manuscript evidence and consistency. So the case for the Bible's textual reliability. The Bible has unparalleled manuscript evidence compared to any other ancient text supporting its accurate transmission over the centuries. This I find to be probably the most compelling aspect of the research that I did. So if you take into consideration like highly quoted ancient texts, Homer's Iliad is probably the most quoted. Below Homer's Iliad, you have the Tacitus Annals, which is like Roman history. It's a story of Roman history. And then below that, you have like the Gallic Wars. So Caesar and his, you know, triumph in Rome. Yep. Those are probably the top quoted historical documents. So like Homer's Iliad, one of the greatest and most influential works of ancient Greek literature attributed to the poet Homer. It's an epic poem that recounts significant events during the final year of the Trojan War, legendary conflict between the Greeks and the city of Troy, right? We know this, the story of the city of Troy. The Iliad is often paired with Homer's other major epic, the Odyssey, which tells of the Greek hero Odysseus and his journey home after the Trojan War. So most cited of all time, it has about 1,800 corroborated manuscripts. Those manuscripts date to within about 400 years of the actual event. So 400 years after the event, there were manuscripts that recorded the event. And over time, there were about 1,800 of those that we found that could corroborate Homer's Iliad. And like, that's pretty significant because like the Tacitus Annals, the Tacitus Annals, those only have 20 manuscripts. And those manuscripts weren't written until 1,000 years after the event. And then even like the Gallic Wars for Caesar, those have 10 manuscripts, and those were written roughly 1,000 years after the event. So you think, okay, 10 manuscripts, 20 manuscripts, pretty good. 1,800, wow, very well documented. You know, to viewers who are listening, if you had to take a guess at the amount of manuscripts that the Bible has that corroborate it independently, what would your guess be? If 1800 is the most well-documented historical thing we have, Homer's Iliad, some might say, oh, maybe 1,000, 1,500.
Oh,
I asked my son,
more.
and he said, well, we come from a theistic background, so he's pro-Bible. He was like, probably like 5,000. Like, yeah, the number is over 25,000. The Bible has over 25,000 manuscripts that independently corroborate the stories in the Bible. Brilliant.
How many chapters are in the Bible? Not even.
I don't know,
not
total chapters. No,
be?
not even close.
Like just chapters.
I mean, there were 40 authors. So, chapters, I would guess maybe 1,000.
Yeah, right on 1189.
Yeah, so
1,200 chapters, but there's
chapters.
25,000 individual manuscripts.
25,000 manuscripts. I mean, you're talking over 13 times the next closest well-documented historical context that we have, or book that we have, or writings.
Yeah,
I mean, that's just staggering to me. If you're going to give any historical book credence, you have to give the Bible its credence. With 25,000 independent manuscripts, it is by far, by a factor of 10, the most well-documented historical book of all time in Earth's history.
Yeah.
You cannot accept any other historical text and not give the Bible its credence. Amazing to me. And then the other thing that's even more brilliant about that is how closely to the time of happening the manuscripts were written. We have manuscripts that date to within 25 years of the actual happenings in the New Testament with Jesus Christ. You have eyewitness writings.
Yeah.
It's the only historical document where we have that.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Incredible.
Yeah, you think about it. I mean, there's roughly 1,200 chapters, just under 1,200 chapters. That means that there's 20 manuscripts per chapter.
Yeah.
Or more.
Yeah.
Right?
Brilliant. That all corroborate with 99.5% accuracy across all of those manuscripts.
Yeah.
People want to talk about, it's been passed down, it's been handed down by tradition, it's not valid, it was orally given, it's like, no. 25,000 manuscripts, different places, different people, different languages, 99.5% corroboration between them all. Treated very respectfully, with immense care. Brilliant.
Do you know who owns the rights to
the Bible? I don't know that anybody does. I think it's open source. You can copy, and there's no copyright to the Bible.
What about some of these manuscripts?
God.
He owns it in a vault.
He's got the copyright on it. Yeah, I know. Like the Catholics at the Vatican own a lot of manuscripts.
The Israeli government, my understanding, owns the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is controversial to Jordan and Palestine.
Yeah. You have collectors. There's a lot of collectors of antiquities of religious significance who own ancient manuscripts.
Yeah.
Some are, in museums.
Does the church own any? The LDS Church?
Yeah, they do. Their church owns a lot of ancient historical stuff.
Be awesome to just hold one of those or see,
even just to be in its presence.
I know.
I've seen, I had a chance to see one of the early copies of the Book of Mormon that was used by Joseph Smith. And even that for me was just it's powerful.
Yeah.
Wow. Touch a book that a prophet of the Restoration touched. It's powerful.
Yeah.
Cool experience. So anyways, that to me is brilliant. So the sheer volume of manuscripts of the Bible allows for cross-checking, reducing the likelihood of corruption or errors during transmission. The Bible far surpasses other ancient works in both quantity and proximity of manuscripts, making it by far the most well-documented text of antiquity. Not even close. Nothing else even holds a candle flame to it. So, if anybody ever comes at you with inaccuracy of the Bible, just be like, please do some research.
Yeah.
You're an idiot.
Yeah. It's a great reference to. It's a book that you and I both love.
Yeah.
Lee Strobel, The Case for Christ, which I'm sure we'll we may just build that next argument around a lot of those.
Probably. I will utilize that heavily in the argument for Christ, because
Yeah.
Lee did a great job.
Yeah.
I think to pull from some of that, but he also did a lot of research into the biblical aspect of it, right? That was kind of how he led into the case for Christ, was the reliability and historicity of the Bible.
Yep.
So yeah, if you've never had a chance to read that book, there's also a movie. They've made a movie multiple times. You can watch the movie where he goes through and just kind of talks about all of his interaction with these experts and the information that he gleaned from all the experts.
Did you watch that?
Yeah, I watched
It's like a documentary style or something? Really interesting.
Case for Christ. It's a great flick. Early dating of manuscripts. So, the New Testament manuscripts are dated closer to originals than any other ancient text. So I referred to this a little. Most scholars agree letters were written 15 to 25 years after Jesus' crucifixion, with the Gospels following within 30 to 60 years. This minimizes the chance for legendary development, as eyewitnesses could challenge inaccuracies, and is the only ancient text where this is true. Read that one more time.
Yeah.
This minimizes the chance for legendary development, as eyewitnesses could challenge inaccuracies, as it is the only ancient text where this is true.
Yeah.
Beast.
Yeah, everything else was just too far past the actual events for any
1,000 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course you're going to get some inaccuracies and some, right? I mean, when we recall an instance of our childhood, I've heard my dad tell stories that just went from caught a shrimp to caught a fish to caught a whale. That's just the natural way that things go, As we get old, we reflect on, our past history with a certain joy and vigor, and, stories just become bigger and funner, and that's part of kind of how it works. But when you're recording early on like they did, it's just, it's brilliant. So complete New Testament books exist from the 2nd and 3rd centuries, with entire copies of the New Testament from the 4th century. Comparatively, other ancient works like Herodotus' histories have a 1,400-year gap between the original and the earliest copy.